Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the session today. My name is Karen Smith, and I'm the Program Coordinator for the Connecting Business Initiative, better known as CBi. We were launched in 2016, and this year marks our 5th anniversary. We've seen a great progress over the years as more businesses have stepped forward to support disaster management, and private sector networks are increasingly recognized as critical partners in supporting vulnerable populations. This week, CBi has organized 4 sessions to raise awareness and highlight good practices of how the local private sector is contributing to disaster preparedness, response, and recovery in different contexts. This is our 4th and final session, focusing on gender considerations in disaster management. The other 3 sessions were held from Monday to Wednesday this week and explored the humanitarian development peace nexus, private sector engagement in disease outbreaks and multi-hazard scenario planning, and new technologies. We hope you found these sessions inspirational, and we look forward to staying in touch with you. They're all available on our website, which will be in the chat if you want to link up with that. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce the session moderator, Adam Wasurnu, who's the Chief of the OCHA Response Support Branch. So we can get started. Adam, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Karen. Colleagues and friends and participants, I hope you can hear me loud and clear. I've had significant challenges this morning. You can see I don't even have the backdrop of the Humanitarian Network Partnership Week. Karen, give me a thumbs up, or Maria, if you can hear me. Great, great, excellent. Thanks a lot, Michael, as well. So as Karen said, I think it's good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much, Karen. Dear participants, I would also like to welcome you to this event, the Gender Disaster Management and the Private Sector, advancing the theme through a multi-stakeholder approach. As we know, gender is an important consideration in disaster management. We have seen this in many ways. Gender inequalities may lead to increased vulnerabilities to disasters. They can heighten exposure to risk and restrict the capacity to respond and recover. This then further increases the already existing inequalities, such as increased poverty and related difficulties to access funding. However, things can be done differently. In most disaster contexts, the majority of vulnerable people to disasters, as we all know, have seen, are women. Understanding and reacting to their needs increases equality and improves the access to disaster assistance. What is the private sector role in all of this? As you know, and as we all know, the private sector is an important part of local communities. They often are the first responders on the ground and can provide immediate disaster assistance. In addition, ensuring the resilience of their own businesses results in a win-win situation. Let me give an example here. Of course, through business continuity planning, the private sector strengthens its own resilience and those of the communities they work in. The private sector has a critical role to play in the recovery of a disaster-affected community, such as in re-establishing essential services in the areas of telecommunications, water, roads, and electricity, and they have done so in many disaster settings. And you know that, the audience, we're all participants and those we're speaking to today. However, when it comes to integrating gender in private sector disaster management, limited work has been done. Some work has been done, but it's rather limited. This topic opens opportunities and has potential to truly make a difference. To better understand challenges and opportunities for the private sector, CBi conducted research on the role of gender in disaster management. The research focused on what has been done so far and what we are hoping to be the priorities moving forward. We also see significant potential in this topic and believe that the biggest opportunities lie in collaboration with other partners. We are pleased that there is considerable interest in the topic, and we are glad to share some of the findings of the research shortly. Ms. Maria Condro, our CBi gender specialist, will now present the overview of the research. We also have 2 expert panelists that I would like to introduce to you. Mr. Simon Peter Opolot, a senior gender advisor for the GenCap, which is Gender Standby Capacity Project, will provide insights on gender. And Mr. Mike Spencer, chair of the Fiji Business Disaster Resilience Council, which is a CBi member network will provide insights on the private sector role. After the views from the panel, we would also like to hear from you. We welcome your commitments and your comments on the findings, and we're looking forward to what kind of support is needed in implementing the findings. Feel free to raise comments or questions, of course, in the chat. I'll stop here. Maria, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Maria Condro, and I'm a gender specialist at Connecting Business Initiative. I would like to present to you the CBi research on gender. Next slide, please. As mentioned by Adam, gender is an important consideration in disaster management. This was recognized also by CBi. However, limited research and resources were available on the interconnectedness of gender, disaster management, and the private sector. As CBi wanted to understand how collective private sector action can contribute to gender equality, it decided to take action. Hence, CBi undertook a study. It included mapping and analyzing almost 200 resources, as well as interviewing people, mentioning particularly an active participation of the CBi private sector member networks. The publication is now available, and in this presentation, I will focus on some of the key findings. The research is not intending to cover all aspects, as it's only a first step in a continuous process. It did identify, however, that the opportunities in this topic are not only various, but also very much needed. Next slide, please. This is because, as we know, disasters don't discriminate, but their impact does. This can be seen in the graph by UN Women on the right. It shows the mortality in 7 disasters where sex and age disaggregated data was collected. Blue representing female mortality in percentage of total mortality, and red representing male mortality. We can clearly see that that gender is an important factor in disasters. To add to this, women's needs and realities continue to be deprioritized in many disasters, and they continue to be excluded from decision-making. In addition to its contribution to human rights, better understanding and inclusion of gender considerations enable more targeted action, which will improve the results of disaster management. Next slide, please. The research highlights that gender indeed is very essential also in private sector disaster management, and that the private sector can have a significant impact to the topic through this approach, improving the results of what they are already doing. This can be done for benefit of business itself, for human rights, and for the results of disaster management. When we look at why is this important, it is essential to recognize, for example, that women are overrepresented in hardest hit economic sectors in disasters, as well as in the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises characterized by informality, which makes them particularly vulnerable to disasters. Besides of being more vulnerable private sector actors, women and women-led micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises face multiple barriers to access financing for their recovery from a disaster. Also, the responsibility of unpaid care work increases in disasters. It falls mostly to women, hindering their abilities as workers and as business owners. Furthermore, the security concerns connected to disasters, and particularly in conflicts, may also restrict women's ability to work and run their businesses. It also has a direct connection to the business continuity of the company itself. The business sector continues to be male-dominated, and many of the realities affecting women are not considered in business continuity planning. Gender considerations, therefore, contribute to the resilience of the company itself. Next slide, please. The topic is also very timely as we are all in an ongoing global disaster. It is important to recognize that the impact of COVID-19 is deeply gendered. The pandemic has hit particularly strongly to women, and the situation has already reversed decades of progress on gender equality. Also, the risk of gender-based violence, exploitation, and abuse has increased due to movement restrictions. Digital gender divide prevents women from accessing and using technology in the same extent as men, and it makes remote working or running businesses remotely even more difficult for women. In the next slide, I will tell more what I mean with the digital gender divide. Next slide, please. So the previous points are just a few considerations, but I also want to mention one of the case studies which we have in the research publication. There is a digital gender divide, which means that women globally don't have the same access to technology, mobile phones, or technical literacy than men do. And why is this important in disaster management? For example, more and more humanitarian assistance and the related micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise support is digitalized. But it's also very relevant for the women-led businesses. Disasters such as pandemics and conflicts may lead to movement restrictions. Running businesses or working remotely becomes important. However, the private sector focused on communications and cell phones can provide solutions. And this has already been successfully done in many refugee camps by identifying the mobile phone needs of women and offering fit for purpose mobile phones and training women to use them. Overall, I believe case studies are important in evidence-based learning and doing. Even more, they are valuable for inspiration. So more examples and good practices can be found in the gender case study section of the publication. This includes Vanuatu micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in a double disaster and displacement in fragile contexts. Next slide, please. Overall, it is important to note that all these matters can find their solutions. The research also addresses the topic from the perspective of a window of opportunity. It means that while crises often have devastating impacts, they can also provide an opportunity for a positive change. Disaster may reveal inequality structures, and the acknowledgement of it may change harmful practices. But we need to take action. We need to build back better, also in terms of the private sector and gender work. And this is worth doing for several reasons. Studies show that gender equality is good for business. Where women play an identical role in labor markets as men, as much as $28 trillion could be added to global annual GDP by 2025. Also, as women deal with disaster consequences more directly, women who are involved in businesses have important knowledge to make the business more resilient. So we need women's expertise to be part of this action. And companies can be part of the positive approach in many ways and even lead initiatives using their core expertise. For example, businesses can react to women's needs in disasters and provide solutions in the sector in which they specialize in. In disasters, companies are also recommended to protect their workers, their marketplace, and their supply chains with gender lenses. CBi will, of course, continue to support the private sector through guidance materials and piloting to see, together with the private sector, what works best. Next slide, please. Thank you all for listening. I want to mention that the publication is available at the CBi website, and we are also happy to continue the conversation with you. So please feel free to contact us as well. I hope to hear your views and experiences on the topic also at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maria. Just getting off mute there. It's going to be our challenge the whole day. Thank you for that excellent presentation. To start the round of comments, maybe I'm really pleased to see that your presentation highlighted that gender influences, private sector disaster management in significant ways. Gender can, of course, truly be a game changer in private sector disaster management, and your points were very clear and crystal in that regard. I think when actions are good for business, when actions advance human rights, and when actions improve the results of disaster management, these actions clearly deserve further attention. I was also happy to hear from Maria's presentation that we already see good practice. They exist, the good practices in this field exist. Particularly important is that the good practices enable all actors to seriously engage in the topic. Of course, we look forward to seeing more of these practices in future to truly understand the extent of the different opportunities. I was particularly struck by the slide, the orange and blue slide, on how women through disaster upon disaster are affected by crises, much more than men. What caught my attention again is the impact on COVID-19 on gender. Therefore, I'd like to highlight that the time to act on gender, more so than ever, is now. We should leave this crisis with good practices to ensure gender is better integrated into disaster management practices, in the case of course, COVID-19 and beyond. The private sector, in close cooperation with the humanitarian community, is in a perfect position to make a difference. I will stop here. I'd like to ask Mr. Simon Peter Opolot, our Senior GenCap Advisor, to come in. Simon, as you've seen, I hope I see you, there you are. As you've seen the gender impact in disaster management in various locations, what would you think is the added value of the participation of the private sector? Over to you, Simon Peter. Thanks. Simon, I believe you're on mute, like me. Cannot hear you. Simon Peter, we cannot hear you. So try to see if the system, there you are.
Okay, are you able to hear me now?
Yes, perfect, loud and clear. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Adam. It is a pleasure to be here today, really to discuss about this important topic. To best answer your question, first I would like to share with you some of the examples from the ground during my work as GenCap Senior Advisor in several large and complex emergencies. I also want to highlight that emergencies are different. There are humanitarian emergencies triggered by natural hazards, such as cyclones and earthquakes, and then there are man-made disasters such as military conflicts that we see around the world. Complex emergencies result from a combination of man-made and natural hazards. They can be particularly challenging to women. As we have seen in the interventions of the previous speakers, humanitarian emergencies can affect women, boys, girls, and men in radically different ways because of the socioeconomic and cultural inequalities that exist in the society before and actually during the disaster itself. Globally, women are significantly more affected by poverty, and poverty is one of the strongest vulnerability factors that bring about, in disasters. Women may not be Women may not be allowed to own land. For example, less than 1% of landholders in Yemen are women, despite women making up 60% of force for crop farming, labor force for crop farming. Women have considerable restrictions in accessing credit. For example, there are 72 countries where women are not allowed to open bank accounts or even obtain credit. Cultural considerations may prevent them from accessing shelters, and this is also connected to the fact that gender-based violence and sexual violence dramatically increases in disasters. As men in Yemen, for example, join in fighting, women are increasingly left to manage households on their own. These women are also impoverished by war and often struggle to access basic services and to protect themselves and their children. In Zimbabwe, where I am at the moment, or where I'm serving at the moment, COVID-19 is already having a disproportionate impact on women's economic and productive lives compared to men. As women have less access to decent work, for example, low job security, overrepresentation, about 65% in the informal sector, and they do the majority of unpaid care work. Women often have higher death rates than men due to disasters from natural hazards. For example, we all know about the infamous 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. There were about 4 times as many women who died in that particular situation. According to my experiences, rather than asking whether gender is a significant factor in disaster management, I would encourage all actors to ask, can there truly be effective disaster management without gender? So in order to answer your question, Madam Edem, the private sector has an important role, and I have seen several examples of how the situation could improve with their gender responsive participation. Cash-based assistance has increasingly become a social safety net for individuals. And I bring this from my experience in Bangladesh with the Rohingya refugees, including women and girls. It is important to put money in the hands of women to improve the situation. The private sector is an active partner with humanitarian organizations in these interventions by channeling the assistance, for example, through shops. To narrow the gender gap in education in Yemen, and considering the security situation, which is particularly important, a very important consideration from a girl's perspective, the locally based private sector transport operators project has recently made gender-friendly and affordable transport options available for school-age children. It particularly considers the protection needs of the girls. This could be a project that, for instance, the education sector tackles in partnership with the livelihood sector in a disaster situation with heightened security concerns. Another example is taken from Zimbabwe. There, women economic empowerment measures have included several important actions led and cooperated with the private sector. These include a variety of economic empowerment loan facilities with flexible credit terms, targeted support and training of women-owned or women-operated enterprises. These can also be, can go beyond gender and cooperate with youth and other disadvantaged economic groups. The government of Zimbabwe, for example, has also put new laws in place and amended existing ones to remove access barriers to land, assets and resources, and offering opportunities to women. All these actions by or with involvement of the private sector can be improved or can have improved the situation for women and reduce the vulnerability to disasters that women and women-owned businesses actually experience. So thank you so much. Over to you.
I think you're on mute, Eden, or I can't hear you.
Yeah, can't hear you, Adam. No. Still can't. Okay, thanks so much, Simon Peter, for those valuable insights. I'll just step in for a second while Adam sorts out her technical challenges. So we also want to hear from the private sector side. So without further ado, Mike, could you provide some comments from your side? Thanks.
Sure. Thanks, Karen. Thank you, Adam. When you come back online, a bulavanaka from Fiji, which means a big hello. Look, I think I should just start up by saying that I'm certainly by no means an expert on this topic. However, it has been impressive to hear about this research by the CBi Secretariat, as well as the comments from the fellow panelists on the gender impact on the ground. This has certainly strengthened my understanding and interest on the importance of the private sector, so to truly recognise and act on gender equality. After reflecting on the examples from Yemen and Zimbabwe, I would like to tell you a little bit about the very different context here in Fiji, in which the gender matter is, however, relevant all the same. So we're a small island developing state. In fact, we're actually 333 islands, particularly vulnerable to climate variations and yearly cyclones. Our business structure consists mainly of MSMEs, although there are also a small number of large businesses. Having seen the gender case study of the Vanuatu MSMEs in a double disaster, which was part of the CBi gender publication, I can agree on the findings also for Fiji. We too had a double disaster of COVID-19 and several cyclones in 2020. Although the COVID cases have remained very low for the past year, many of the economic sectors have been heavily influenced by movement restrictions, tourism in particular. The economic sectors in which women work were hit hardest also in Fiji. In addition to tourism, women work here as farmers, workers on farms, and as market vendors, often performing part of the informal economy. These professions are not covered by income protection, and their access to finance is limited. This is in addition to the fact that women were earning 25% less than men in Fiji already prior to any disaster. And to make matters worse, 1 week ago, we've been hit by our second wave of COVID-19. And most of the country is currently in a 14-day lockdown and potentially on the verge of a disaster, as the Indian variant that we have is highly transmissible. And the AstraZeneca vaccine we have, the only one we have in fact, is possibly not as effective as other vaccines on this variant. An assessment in Fiji revealed that the majority of women and girls were expected to do more housework than their male family members during the lockdown period, causing challenges for women trying to study or work from home while caring for children and conducting other unpaid house duties, which had increased in volume. How these realities for women translate into business continuity plans is an essential question for women-owned businesses, for the economic sectors hit hardest by disasters, and for the entire value chain structures. Therefore, what Maria said about COVID-19, gender, and the private sector is particularly true also in Fiji. What is needed to bring this theme forward from a private sector side? First of all, the private sector, particularly the chambers and the networks, needs to collect sex, disability, and age disaggregated data within their business operations to understand what is happening. We need to ensure that women are included in the recovery actions. Women's participation in economic decision-making and potential growth areas and development of long-term economic recovery plans is important. Targeting recovery funding to women and women-owned businesses helps the entire economic structure. In Fiji, there are specific projects to carry out activities focused on getting women-owned businesses back on their feet through product innovation, livelihood diversification, and the development of contingency plans. It's also important to partner with women organisations, because these are the ones that have context-specific information on the situation and on women entrepreneurs' needs and realities. Here in Fiji, we're lucky because we have Women Entrepreneurs and Business Council. But I think also that the private sector's cooperation with the UN and the humanitarian partners is also needed. With the CBi Secretariat, we have jointly identified a need for capacity strengthening on these themes. For understanding the importance and extent of this, as well as on how to mainstream gender into our private sector disaster management operations, including having guidance notes available and sharing information and good practices from the private sector, which are already in place for COVID-19 and for other disaster situations. One opportunity we have in Fiji is technology. So Maria mentioned that a private sector focused on communications and cell phones can provide solutions. Here in Fiji, 89% of the population have smartphones, and I'm very keen to explore how we can take advantage of this opportunity. These are the comments and views, obviously, from the perspective of only one country. I'm sure that with the expertise present in this forum, we will have more ideas on what is needed to go forward. Thank you for this brief opportunity to share my thoughts on this important topic. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Can you hear me? I'm back.
Yes, we can.
Great. Talking of an opportunity we have in Fiji's technology, I'm being challenged by technology in my very own office in Geneva. So when I was in Maiduguri, I didn't have problems with my phone and technology. And here we are. Excellent insights into how the private sector can be part of this process and what is needed going forward. I'd like to hear the different perspectives, colleagues in the audience, express your knowledge, recommendations. We're calling for different comments. I see, Maria, are you going to read the comments in the, I see only one comment. Do you all see only one comment as well from Verena?
We have a few comments. I believe they are in the chat box as well as in the questions and answers. So I believe, let's see, the first one was, can you please also share some case studies on how you have engaged private sector for the gender agenda? So this is very relevant question. I think we all have some good case studies on the matter. I would, from my side, I would encourage everyone to access the CBi gender research, where there is a section for case studies. So you can find several case studies over there. But I also would like to highlight the importance of case studies overall and the role of all actors, either private sector or working with the private sector, to really collect and systematize case studies, as they're very valuable part of learning and doing. Would maybe one of the panelists want to mention some specific case studies from their side?
Yes, thanks a lot, Maria. Simon, Peter, or Mike, would you like to come in? Not to put you on the spot necessarily, but any case studies, welcome. I think you've given us a good overview from Yemen to Zimbabwe to Fiji, examples in the CBi report and Vanuatu. Any suggestions and ideas, welcome. Over to you, and
thank you.
Mike?
Maybe I could jump in briefly. There is a question even here on the chat section, where a colleague Henrika is asking if there are some examples on cash-based assistance. Yes, from my experience in Bangladesh with the Rohingya refugees, exactly what you're mentioning here was done, and that is involvement of men, so that the whole operation, when you're involving women in cash-based, or when you're supporting women through cash-based assistance, there should be no secret. It should be an open intervention where men are involved and they come to understand why we are intervening in that way. Actually, the men, the Rohingya refugee men, appreciated, once they understood the experiences of women, they then actually supported the whole operation. And in that way, we reduced gender-based violence at household level. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Simon, Peter. Those examples, very clear, crystal on what is happening and what lessons we can learn going forward. Thank you for that. Mike, anything from your side?
Nothing really specific yet. I mean, from the Fiji Business Disaster Resilience Council, it's just a topic that we've only started looking at recently. So there has been work done by other groups in Fiji. I'm not really an expert on that, and I can't really comment too much, but there is some work done. But certainly we're the new chair and my vice chair have just started looking at this as probably a topic of focus for us going forward for this year and next year. So apologies, but I can't give you anything specific from my personal experience.
Not to worry at all. Didn't want to put anybody on the spot there. It was just more for colleagues to jump in. Maria, do you have other questions? Again, my view is to great example, Simon Peter, anyway, we can access details. So people want more details. We've got Georgia thanking the panelists for the talks, emphasis on women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurship, cash transfers, super important. Issues related to case studies, as Maria kindly walked us through. Maybe as we have a few more minutes, I could ask, Simon, you've got extensive experience also in conflict affected and fragile states. Would you like to share some experiences there? We can also put things in the chat if you would. Mike also mentioned private sector partners with women's organizations. You could elaborate further if you want. So Mike, over to you first, and then to Simon Peter on conflict settings, if we could. Thanks. Over to you.
The question is on women's forums.
Yes, women, private sector partners with women's organizations from your perspective.
Yeah, but I think what's come out of this forum is that it's very clear that disasters impact women much more than men, and in so many ways too. So in Fiji, we are very fortunate in the fact that we do have a lot of strong women organisations already set up. I'm looking forward to discussing with them their learnings and how we can work together to improve the impact of women in disasters, which in turn, of course, will improve the impact on the private sector as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you. Very clear. Simon Peter, want to jump in here on the conflict specific or not? No problem if not. We have 3-4 minutes more. Over to you.
Thank you. Maybe I could take us back to Bangladesh. As we all know, as the whole world knew about the Rohingya refugees coming in from Myanmar and getting provided refuge in Bangladesh. That was a very desperate situation. I actually happened to have been in Bangladesh. I arrived in July of 2017, and I served in there for 2 years, and I watched how the refugees were being supported. I particularly watched how the private sector came in. One of the ways the private sector came in was in manufacturing. There were up to 1.something million refugees, and the private sector came in to train women groups within the refugee camps, train them in soap making, in cloth making, and actually the market for the items they were making was available within the refugee community itself. The other way the private sector came in, especially through banking and providing of financial access opportunities to women groups and the others, the bank helped in giving women bank ATM cards and the others. So I can really see that the private sector played a major role in here, and they really still have got a bigger role to play. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Simon Peter. I think maybe let me throw in a perspective here. We have colleagues in the chat box, I think, thanking all of us, the panelists, for the examples from Simon and Mike, and also from Maria. Maria, if there's anything I'm missing, put your hand up and let me know. But I think that's, yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. We have some questions in the questions and answers chat box as well. So I'm trying to briefly address this as well. So the first one is, according to GSMA research, 300 million fewer women use the internet compared to men, and this was pre-COVID-19. How can CBi facilitate concrete support in connectivity infrastructure and digital literacy to small business entrepreneurs in remote and fragile conflict emergency settings? Well, it's a very large topic. I think the key issue here is first that all the actors, private sector, humanitarian actors, and all the other ones should start with ensuring that they are collecting sex, age, and disability disaggregated data, so we know really what is happening. This has come up in the conversations already a couple of times, but I cannot highlight the importance of it enough, because we need to know first what is happening, and especially in the private sector where the gender and disaster management data is not yet that much available. So I would encourage everyone to collect disaggregated data as part of their operations. And then what the CBi can do, as the topic is quite new. Well, GSMA has of course been working with some very impressive research and other work in this area. So they have already very good experiences and best practices on that. But overall, the topic is quite recent, so it's important to have also, in addition to the data, to have a dialogue and conversations with all actors, because different actors bring different perspectives, and this is how we can have a better view of the situation and therefore to target the actions better. So at the moment, CBi is working on the field, for example, through the research in which we had a case study available as part of the research on this topic. We cooperated with GSMA on the specific case study to offer some specific actions as well. But we are also now starting to develop guidance tools to translate the research into concrete actions. And this is what we are doing in cooperation with the private sector actors, with the CBi member networks, to really understand what is needed. So I'm answering more on a general view on the topic. This applies to the specific area of connectivity, but also in the other topics, other sectors.
Okay, thanks a lot, Maria. I think there are other questions related to GBV and disasters, etc. You've captured, I think, the essence of the questions here. We can also post the answers in the chat box. So why don't we do that for specificities related to GBV? I find, indeed, I'm agreeing with a colleague, Agnes, on bringing in men. I think Maria alluded to it, and also Simon Peter alluded to it mentioned it in the Rohingya response. Colleagues, unfortunately, we have to. I have to wrap up and make sure I'm on time per the instructions I have. This is a very, very passionate topic for most of us. These discussions have highlighted truly the important role of gender in the private sector disaster management field. And I have to say, I have learned quite a lot. The study was really, really insightful. Of course, we can talk about this topic for a long time, but unfortunately, I will have to bring it to a close. We definitely hope the conversation will continue with all of you and the different fora. This is a massive field, and a lot of work has been done, and a lot of work will continue to be done. In closing, I really wanted to highlight, this is only, of course, like I said, the start of what is expected to be an ongoing conversation. We invite all our participants, colleagues, friends of this topic, people who are passionate in this area, to continue reflecting on how to bring the issue of gender in their own operations, as well as in multi-stakeholder conversations. The Connecting Business initiative also continues to this important work of gender in private sector disaster management. Thank you to our panelists, Maria, for her excellent work and the research and the presentation. Thank you to Mike, also a CBi member network all the way in Fiji. And thank you so much for taking also the time out from your work in Zimbabwe, Simon Peter, to my colleague and all the colleagues of the CBi, but also to Karen, for supporting and being behind the scenes on this session. Thank you, colleagues, and good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, and good night. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Good day too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.